The courtroom air was thick, choking with the weight of 100 eyes boring into her. Maya Jackson stood at the defendant's table, her hands trembling but her chin high, as the word guilty tore from her lips like a confession to a sin she didn't commit. The gasp from the gallery was a wave crashing over the room, threatening to drown her where she stood. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not Maya, the 32-year-old nurse who'd spent her life stitching wounds and soothing pain in a small Alabama town. Not Maya, whose only crime was being black in a place where justice often wore a blindfold stitched with prejudice. The charge? Assault. The victim? A white police officer, Tom Hargrove, whose bruised ego and split lip had turned a routine traffic stop into a crucible of lies. The truth was a casualty, buried under Hargrove's claim that Maya had attacked him unprovoked, a story the prosecution wielded like a sledgehammer. The judge, Henry Whitaker, a man whose lined face carried 60 years of Southern history, stared down from the bench. His eyes, sharp as flint, flickered between Maya and the prosecutor, Daniel Reed, a man whose polished suit couldn't hide the venom in his voice. Reed's closing argument still echoed, "This woman's defiance is a danger to our community. She struck an officer, a protector of our peace. Justice demands accountability." Maya's lawyer, Sarah Cohen, a wiry public defender with fire in her veins, had fought tooth and nail. She'd presented witnesses, a gas station clerk, a passerby who saw Hargrove shove Maya first, his hand heavy on her shoulder, his words laced with slurs. But their testimonies were dismissed as unreliable by a jury that looked at Maya and saw only the color of her skin. The evidence was thin, the case flimsy, but in this town, truth bent under the weight of power. The room pulsed with tension as Maya's voice broke the silence. "I'm guilty," she said again, softer this time, her eyes locked on the judge. The crowd stirred, a mix of shock and triumph rippling through them. Sarah's head snapped toward her client, her whisper urgent. "Maya, what are you doing?" But Maya's gaze didn't waver. She was tired of the lies, the glares, the system that had already convicted her before the trial began. If they wanted a confession, she'd give them one, but on her terms. Judge Whitaker's gavel hovered, his face unreadable. He'd seen cases like this before, too many, in his 30 years on the bench. Black defendants, white accusers, and a town that clung to its old wounds like a badge of honor. He leaned forward, his voice low but commanding. "Ms. Jackson, you understand the consequences of this plea?" Maya nodded, her heart pounding. "I do, Your Honor. But I'm not guilty of what they say. I'm guilty of expecting fairness in a place that doesn't give it. I'm guilty of believing my life matters." Her words cut through the room, sharp and unyielding, and for a moment, even Reed's smug expression faltered. The gallery erupted. A woman in the back, her face lined with years of struggle, shouted, "Tell him, Maya." A man in a pressed suit hissed, "She's playing the race card." The bailiff banged his fist, calling for order, but the chaos only grew. Whitaker's gavel came down hard, a crack that silenced the room like a gunshot. His eyes never left Maya's, searching for something, truth, perhaps, or a reason to believe this case wasn't just another stain on his conscience. Flashback to 3 months earlier. A humid July evening, the kind where the air clung to your skin like regret. Maya had been driving home from a double shift at the hospital, her scrub still stained with the day's work. Hargrove's cruiser had flashed its lights behind her, and she'd pulled over, heart sinking. She knew the drill hands on the wheel, voice polite, eyes down. But Hargrove wasn't in the mood for compliance. He'd leaned into her window, his breath sour with coffee and contempt. "You people always think you can speed through my town," he'd said, though Maya's speedometer hadn't ticked past 30. She'd tried to stay calm, to explain she was just heading home. But Hargrove's hand had shot out, grabbing her arm, yanking her from the car when she questioned his tone. The asphalt bit into her knees as she fell, and when she pushed back, instinct, not violence, he'd stumbled, his pride more wounded than his body. The handcuffs came next, cold and tight, as he spun a story of assault that the dashcam mysteriously failed to record. Now, in the courtroom, that night felt like a lifetime ago. Maya's life had unraveled since her job suspended, her savings drained, her name dragged through whispers and headlines. The town of Fairview, Alabama, was split down the middle. Half saw her as a hero, a black woman standing up to a system rigged against her. The other half saw her as a threat, a symbol of everything they feared about change. Protests had erupted outside the courthouse, signs reading, "Justice for Maya," clashing with chants of, "Back the Blue." Sarah leaned close, her voice a fierce whisper. "Maya, you don't have to do this. We can appeal. We can fight." But Maya shook her head. She'd seen the jury's faces, the way they avoided her eyes. She'd heard the whispers in the hallways, the ones that called her trouble, before she'd even opened her mouth. Fighting felt like screaming into a void. Reed seized the moment, stepping forward with a predator's grin. "Your Honor, the defendant has admitted her guilt. I move for immediate sentencing. The people demand justice." His words were smooth, practiced, but they carried a weight that made Maya's stomach twist. Justice, in his mouth, sounded like a weapon. Whitaker raised a hand, silencing Reed. His gaze shifted to the gallery, to the faces twisted with anger, hope, and everything in between. He'd grown up in Fairview, seen its beauty and its ugliness, its churches and its chain gangs. He'd sworn to uphold the law, but the law, he knew, wasn't always just. "Ms. Jackson," he said, his voice steady but heavy, "this court has heard your plea. But I need to know why. Why plead guilty now, after fighting so hard?" Maya took a breath, her voice trembling but clear. "Because I'm tired, Your Honor. Tired of a system that makes me prove my humanity every day. Tired of being punished for existing. If saying I'm guilty gets this over with, lets my family move on, then I'll say it. But I won't let you think I'm sorry for who I am." The room went still. Even Reed seemed caught off guard, his mouth half open with no words to fill it. Sarah's eyes glistened, her hand squeezing Maya's arm. In the gallery, the woman from before wiped tears from her cheeks, while a man in a trucker hat muttered under his breath. The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with every second. Whitaker leaned back, his fingers tracing the edge of his gavel. He thought of his own daughter, a lawyer in Atlanta, who'd once asked him how he slept at night knowing the system he served was broken. He hadn't had an answer then. He wasn't sure he had one now. But as he looked at Maya's strength, her defiance, her pain, felt something shift inside him. "Ms. Jackson," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a decision he hadn't planned to make. "This court is not blind to the truth, even when it's buried under lies. I'm dismissing this case. You're free to go." The room exploded. Shouts of outrage and joy collided, a cacophony that drowned out the bang of Whitaker's gavel. Reed's face twisted in disbelief, his fist slamming the table. "This is an outrage, Your Honor. You're undermining the law." But Whitaker's eyes were on Maya, who stood frozen, her breath caught in her chest. Sarah grabbed her, pulling her into a fierce hug. "You did it," she whispered. "You're free." But Maya's eyes were on the judge, searching for the catch, the trick. Freedom, in her experience, always came with a price. Whitaker stood, his robe sweeping as he addressed the room. "I've served this bench for 3 decades, and I've seen justice twisted more times than I can count. Today, I'm done letting it happen under my watch. Ms. Jackson, you've been failed by this town, by this system, by me. Go home. Live your life." The words hit Maya like a wave, washing away the fear, the anger, the weight of months spent fighting. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. "Thank you, Your Honor." As the bailiff cleared the room, the crowd's voices rose again, some cheering, some cursing. Outside, the protests would continue, the town's wounds still raw. But for Maya, the fight was over, at least for today. She stepped out of the courtroom, the sunlight warm on her face, and took her first free breath in months. Maya stepped into the sunlight, the courthouse doors swinging shut behind her. The air outside was heavy with the scent of magnolias and the distant hum of protesters, their voices a chaotic blend of support and scorn. Her sister, Lena, was waiting at the bottom of the steps, her eyes red from crying but her arms open wide. They collided in a hug that felt like salvation. Lena's whispered, "You're okay," a lifeline Maya hadn't known she needed. The crowd parted as Maya and Lena moved toward the parking lot. Signs bobbed above heads, "Justice for Maya," scrawled in bold marker, "Respect the law," in angry red paint. A TV crew shoved a microphone toward her, a reporter's voice cutting through the noise. "Ms. Jackson, how do you feel about the judge's ruling?" Maya paused, her heart still racing from the courtroom. She wanted to say everything about the fear, the anger, the relief, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she offered a small smile. "I feel like I can breathe again." Back inside, Judge Whitaker sat alone in his chambers, the weight of his decision settling into his bones. He'd known the ruling would spark a firestorm. Fairview wasn't ready for this, not for a black woman walking free, not for a judge calling out the system's flaws. His phone was already buzzing with messages, colleagues warning of backlash, old friends accusing him of betrayal. But as he stared at a faded photo of his daughter on his desk, he felt a flicker of peace. For once, he'd done what was right, not just what was expected. Across town, Officer Tom Hargrove nursed a beer at a dimly lit bar, his jaw tight as he watched the news replay Whitaker's ruling. The bartender, a grizzled man named Joe, shook his head. "That judge just lit a match, Tom. This town's gonna burn." Hargrove didn't respond, but his grip on the bottle tightened. He'd told his story 100 times, how Maya had lunged at him, how he'd only defended himself. The truth, he insisted to himself, was on his side. But deep down, in a place he refused to name, he knew the dashcam's malfunction was no accident. The days that followed were a storm. Maya's story spread beyond Fairview, picked up by national outlets hungry for a tale of race, justice, and redemption. Social media erupted, hashtags like "Justice for Maya" and "Back the Blue" trending in a bitter tug-of-war. Protests grew louder, spilling into the streets. At a rally outside City Hall, a young black activist named Jamal held a megaphone, his voice raw with passion. "Maya Jackson is every one of us judged before we even speak. This isn't just her victory. It's ours." But not everyone saw it that way. At a counter-protest, a white retiree named Carl waved a sign reading, "Law and Order." "If we let people like her walk, what's next?" he told a reporter, his voice shaking with conviction. "Officers risk their lives. They deserve respect." The divide wasn't new, but Maya's case had torn the scab off Fairview's wounds, exposing the raw, unhealed truth beneath. Maya tried to reclaim her life, but normalcy was a ghost. Her hospital job was gone. Her supervisor cited public image concerns, though the real reason hung unspoken in the air. She spent her days at Lena's small apartment, helping her niece, Aisha, with homework and avoiding the news. But the world wouldn't let her fade. Letters poured in, some filled with support, others with hate so vile it made her stomach churn. One, handwritten on plain paper, stood out, "You're a hero, Ms. Jackson. Don't let them break you." It was signed simply, "A friend." Sarah Cohen, her lawyer, became a constant presence, pushing Maya to speak out. "Your story matters," Sarah said one evening over coffee, her eyes bright with purpose. "You could change things, Maya. Show people what's wrong with this system." But Maya wasn't sure she wanted to be a symbol. She wanted her life back, her scrubs, her patience, the quiet pride of a job well done. Yet the more she tried to retreat, the more the world pulled her forward. A week after the ruling, a community meeting was called at Fairview's town hall. The room was packed, the air electric with tension. Maya hadn't planned to attend, but Lena convinced her. "You don't have to speak," Lena said, squeezing her hand. Just show them you're still here. Maya sat in the back, her heart pounding as voices rose, some calling for unity, others demanding Whitaker's resignation. When a pastor named Reverend Ellis took the podium, his words cut through the noise. "This town is bleeding," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "We can't heal if we keep pretending the wound isn't there." Then, to Maya's horror, the moderator called her name. Heads turned, eyes locking onto her. She froze, but Lena nudged her forward. "You got this," she whispered. Maya stood, her legs shaky, and walked to the podium. The room went quiet, every face a mirror of hope, anger, or curiosity. "I'm not here to fight," Maya began, her voice soft but growing stronger. "I'm here because I'm tired. Tired of being seen as less, of being judged for my skin. I didn't ask for this, but I'm standing here because I want Fairview to be better for my niece, for your kids, for all of us." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "I don't want your pity. I want your courage. To listen. To change." The room was silent for a moment, then a slow clap started, growing into applause from half the crowd. The other half sat stone-faced, arms crossed. Maya stepped down, her heart racing but lighter. She'd said her piece. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Judge Whitaker watched from the side, his presence unnoticed by most. He'd come to hear the town, to gauge the fallout of his decision. Maya's words hit him hard, a reminder of why he'd acted. Later, as the meeting ended, he approached her quietly. "You're stronger than I'll ever be, Ms. Jackson," he said, his voice low. "I hope you know that." Maya nodded, unsure how to respond to a man who'd given her freedom but couldn't erase the scars. Hargrove, too, was there, lingering in the back. He didn't clap, didn't speak, but his eyes followed Maya as she left. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind, not enough to change him, but enough to make him question the story he'd told himself. He slipped out before anyone could confront him, the weight of his badge heavier than ever. Months passed, and Fairview began to shift, however slowly. The police department, under pressure, implemented new training on de-escalation and bias. Whitaker retired, his final act a public letter calling for reform. Maya found work at a clinic in a neighboring town, her hands once again healing instead of fighting. She and Lena started a small community group, meeting weekly to talk about justice, race, and hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One evening, as Maya walked Aisha home from school, the girl looked up at her. "Auntie, are things gonna get better?" Maya hesitated, then smiled. "They will if we keep trying, baby." Aisha nodded, her small hand tight in Maya's, and they walked on, the sunset painting the sky in hues of possibility. The story of Maya Jackson didn't end Fairview's divides, but it cracked them open, forcing the town to face its truths. Her courage, Whitaker's ruling, and the voices that rose in her wake became a spark, one that could fade or ignite depending on what came next. What do you think? Where does justice lie in a story like this? And what would you do to bridge a community torn apart?